All right, I see it is 2 minutes past the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Once again, my name is Carrie Sampson. I am the Communications Manager for the Credential Engine team. And on behalf of Credential Engine and our partners joining us today, I'd like to welcome you to our application showcase. We are so thankful that you are taking the time to join us and check out how we are able to use transparent credential data to solve real-world problems. So a couple of housekeeping items that I'm going to tick through while the last couple of our participants sort of jump on here and get started. One is that you should see to your left-hand side a chat box. My colleague Scarlett Van Steckelman, our administration coordinator, is already typing away in there. But this is how we're going to try and monitor our questions throughout the day. So feel free, if a question pops up, a comment, something that you're interested in, please use that chat box off to the left. We will keep an eye on it, make sure that all of your questions get answered, but don't hesitate. Use that, and we'll make sure that we get back to you throughout the presentation. One other thing I just want to mention as a housekeeping item, while we are recording this session, we will try to keep our participants on mute until we get to the Q&A section at the end of our presentation where we can take sort of questions by phone. So if you do have to take another call, please hang up and dial back in or mute your speakers. And don't call in and have your speakers on mute, because then we have this weird echo thing. So just make sure to keep yourself on mute and hang up and dial back in so we don't get your hold music. With that, I am going to start kicking things off with just a little bit about us. So Credential Engine's mission, we are dedicated to promoting transparency and credential literacy in the marketplace to reveal the world of credentials and inform the public. We believe that transparent credential data will really help students be able to make better decisions, employers to be able to better understand what students know and can do, will help education institutions and credentialing bodies be able to understand best practices and trends, help states to be able to figure out where they want to take their credentialing pathways to meet up with their economic needs. So we really think that by creating a transparent market for credentials that we can really bring prosperity and sort of lift all boats in that way. So the way we do this is in two ways. One, we create a common language to describe all credentialing information. That's called our Credential Transparency Description Language, or CTDL. And the second thing we do is provide a common place to house all credential information. That includes everything from, as you'll hear from LRNG today, a digital badge, to an apprenticeship, to a traditional degree, to a certification, a licensure. Any kind of credential can be housed in this cloud-based system called our Credential Registry. So how do you get information out of the Credential Registry? Well, we have a generic search platform, but what if you only wanted to get some information out of the Credential Registry? We house over 300 different terms of data that we can collect information on, but not everybody needs all of that data on every credential in the U.S. all the time. So how we are able to create strategic searches is through our open applications marketplace, and that's what you're going to hear about today. We provide this open apps marketplace so that organizations can build customized functions that use the exact information that they need from the registry without all the extra stuff that they don't need from the registry. And today you're going to hear from two organizations building those customized searches and applications for pulling information from our Credential Registry. The first will be from LRNG, and we have Connie Yowell, who's the CEO over at LRNG, and she's going to be presenting on their application to help low-income youth. And then we'll be hearing from NOCTI. We'll hear from John Foster, who's their president and CEO, and he'll be talking about how to improve search for technical standards and comparing those. So without further ado, if Connie, if you are ready, I'm going to turn the microphone and the presentation over to you.
Terrific. Thanks so much. It was a wonderful introduction. And I want to start first by thanking the team at Credential Engine as well as the Lumina Foundation. I just think the work you all are doing is just so incredibly important to how we build out the ecosystem into the future. And I just want to thank you all for doing such extraordinary work and for hosting these webinars so that we can all see what others are doing. So I want to jump in and just give you a little bit of background on what we do at LRNG and then go into in a little more depth what we are beginning to do with Credential Engine. So at LRNG, at our core, we are really focused on helping to build equitable, just, and healthy communities. And we do that with both a deep hands-on local support way, but also, as importantly, with a technology-enabled ecosystem. And we know that we will be successful when we've actually begun to close the equity gap and are truly putting young people on paths to success. Now, the problem that we are trying to solve, I want to describe both at a little bit of a high level and then at a more concrete level. So at a high level, as we build healthy, just, and equitable communities, we know that those communities, in order to be healthy, just, and equitable, have to be both horizontally connected and vertically connected. And what I mean by that is, horizontally, our young people are trying to patch meal their paths to success by connecting the different systems that they are a part of. So whether it's school, being in school, learning in informal learning communities, having jobs, we have left it to our young people to build those horizontal connections across those systems. It's part of what we believe causes the equity gap or the fragmentation between systems. Vertically, in addition, when you think about the ecosystems of the future, right now the only integration, vertical integration that we have for young people and that we've worked on as an education community is between high schools and college. For better or for worse, that's what we have. We have a burgeoning and ever-broadening ecosystem in the future of work now that has to be connected to all of the learning experiences that young people are having in their earlier years. And so we have to figure out both how do we connect for young people across the various systems that they're participating in on a daily basis, but then how do we then connect those systems to their future ecosystem, neither of which currently are connected. So for us at a macro level, those are the core problems we're trying to solve. At a concrete level, we also know that this can't just be about administrative connections, that we actually have to design the connections within ecosystems and across ecosystems so they work for our young people, so that we fundamentally have to design with young people in mind, because we know that in order for them to be on paths to success, that they've got to be able to develop and share their skills and competencies, that they've got to be able to make visible what they know and can do wherever they've learned it, and that, as importantly, whatever they're learning has to then be immediately connected to real-world opportunities. And that if we don't solve these daily pain points for our young folks, that we are not going to really move on changing the cycles of poverty that we now have in the U.S. So that's how we see the problem. Big problems, no one organization has a solution to those problems. We just want to be a participant in the ecosystem and in the community of folks that are trying to solve it. So this is what we bring to the table in terms of how we begin to think about the proposed solution. And the first, three things. The first is that we really believe that we've got to be able to credential learning wherever and whenever it happens. And for LRNG, we use the open badge infrastructure, the OBI, that Mozilla began to build with MacArthur funding several years ago. We think the interoperability and the information that's carried in these badges is a critical element of building a solution to healthy, just, and equitable ecosystems. Secondly, we really want these badges, they can't be disconnected from learning. Instead, they've got to be integrated into the learning experience. So for LRNG, that means that we integrate badges into playlists and directly into the path. for young people so that they can immediately see the connection between what they're learning and the badge that they will earn as a result of building those competencies and skills. And third, all of this has to be discoverable and visible for the young person. So we both want it to work for the practitioners and the administrators working the system, but we've got to make them also so that they're visible and easily accessible for all of our young people. So that's part of our design for how we think about LRNG and what we do. And so how does this work? What does it look like? At a very minimum, when it comes to the badges, we are in the process of building out a new set of functionality around portfolios so that youth can always see what they've accomplished and that they have their own dashboard for which they can see all of the badges that they have earned. And if you click on one of those badges, you can see the evidence of what the young people have done in order to earn the badge. So it's a portfolio that youth can carry with them wherever they go. But that portfolio is only as useful as those badges are aligned to credentials that have meaning in the world of work. And so our partnership with Credential Engine is critically important to us for really changing the lives of low-income kids. And so part of the work that we'll be doing with Credential Engine is really how do the badges that young people earn on LRNG or through the open badge, the OBI standard, how do they align with credentials that are accepted in that next ecosystem? How are they aligned if a young person is earning badges in a museum, in a library, in an after-school program, in school, in summer youth employment? How do those badges align with credentials that have currency in the world of work? And so that's a key component of our partnership with Credential Engine. And then what that means is as soon as we can align them, then we can begin to backward map. So we can then say to our young people and build out paths on LRNG that says if you really want this credential, there are actually 3 more badges that you have to earn. And here are the pathways for you, or the playlist for you to complete in order to earn those badges that will then connect you to the certification. So our connection with Credential Engine, we believe, is really going to be able to help young people be able to access and see how they can move on their path to success. And then lastly, part of what's really critical for us is that some of you know that part of how, at the turn of the century, how high schools were developed was that they were backward mapped from college curriculum and standards. The College Board created the curriculum and the design of the traditional high school, the comprehensive high school. We believe at LRNG in the 21st century, it is this relationship between credentials that can be awarded by schools, by colleges, by companies, will hold the key to how we then back map learning in younger years for our young people. So the benefit here for us and our partnership with Credential Engine is that we at LRNG can then work within our communities, our community-based programs, our summer youth employment programs, our schools, to say these are the paths that are available to our young people. We need help. We need to begin to build the learning experiences for our young people to ensure that they are earning the skills and competencies that will enable them to level up and earn these credentials. So for us, there's significant benefit to our local community-based partners. There's significant benefit to our local employers to be able to be a part of that ecosystem. And most importantly, there is significant benefit to our young people. Because of the transparency of Credential Engine, what that means is saying the future world of work, what it requires to be successful in the future world of work, will be transparent to our young people. And through LRNG or other partners with Credential Engine, young people will be able to more easily access and participate in paths that enable them to earn those credentials. And will be able to do it both within institutions but also on their own as they participate in our ecosystem at LRNG or in other partners. So we really think that there's tremendous benefit both within LRNG but across the entire ecosystem that we're working in. as we build out our relationship and others do with Credential Engine. So let me stop there, and I'll turn it over to John. But we're thrilled to be a part of this new work and to be in partnership with Credential Engine.
Thanks, Connie. That was really insightful, and we are so excited to see how LRNG is going to be able to integrate with Credential Engine's Credential Registry and our work. I'm going to pause just for a second just to see if there are any questions for Connie that get typed into the chat. And I see there's one for me, which I will answer, Kelvin. I will get to you in a second. All right, I don't see any for Connie yet, but please make a good use of the chat box because we're here to answer your questions. But without further ado, John, if you are ready, I am happy to turn things over to you.
Yeah, we're ready. My volume okay?
Go ahead. Yep, we can hear you just fine. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, like Connie, we want to make sure that we say thank you to Credential Engine and all of its funders. You know, we believe that the Credential Engine has pretty strong significance in terms of the audience and the populations that we deal with. And I'll get into that in a second. But, you know, let me just say that, you know, at the outset here, we have some, you know, firsthand issues in dealing with credentialing transparency at really all levels. And for us, that includes, you know, secondary and community college and state level and adult level and military and employers. It's just, you know, for the last several years since industry credentials have really taken, you know, front stage in a number of different, with a number of different audiences. It seems there's confusion, you know, with a lot of different audiences about what's valued, what isn't valued, and those sorts of questions, just as a bare minimum. What's quality, what's not quality, and those sorts of things. So let me tell you a little bit about us first, and what we do, and you know, what our primary audience is. As you can see from the slide, we're a not-for-profit, and we've been around for a long time. I won't spend any time talking about our history, but you can see from the listing that essentially we provide credentials in about 120 different specific technical areas. And when I say technical areas, I'm really talking about occupational based areas. So if you abide by the different career clusters that the Department of Labor and Department of Education have more or less agreed to, the 16 career clusters, including things like agriculture and transportation and construction and things like that. We basically deliver those 120 credentials in essentially all of those technical areas, some more than others, but you know, lots and lots of stuff. And as you can see from the list, we provide materials for test preparation, and we like LRNG, do digital badges. We do college credit, available to over 1,500 colleges and universities for a particular score on these credentialing assessments, and you know, offer study guides and professional development and things like that. What this slide doesn't really say is the population that we deal with. Primarily, we deal with the career and technical education population, and typically that's kind of outlined by those who would draw federal Perkins dollars. And so those would be career and technical education students at the secondary level, typically 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, and community college students, and adult students as well, for, you know, short-term kind of training programs. We do you know, pre-employment testing with industry. We also deliver a number of different industry associations, but that's really not the focus of this particular presentation. It's interesting listening to our old friend Connie, because, you know, we have similar you know, concepts and a similar way of looking at things. We just have a slightly different population that we deal with, and I think that's really it's really cool that you guys put us on the same showcase. So I appreciate that. So we've decided to take a pretty specific look at what we might do with some of the information in the Credential Engine. So, you know, if we take a look at our taxonomy, if you will, essentially we have assessments that credentials are based on, and those credentials and those assessments are based on standards, and within each of those standards are competencies. You know, so for example, if I was looking in the area of construction and I looked at the specific occupational area of carpentry, there might be 8 or 10 different standards, and they might be things like blueprint reading, they might be things like framing a wall, might be framing a roof, there might be interior trim and things like that. And then underneath of each of those standards, there would be several competencies. So, you know, underneath of blueprint reading, there might be things like converting fractions to decimals. There might be understanding a visual plan and converting it to an implementation plan, things like that. And then we also deal with performance components as well. But anyway, that's kind of our taxonomy. So it's clusters, it's occupations, it's standards, and it's competencies. So, you know, at the end of the day, all credentials are based on an assessment or a test of some degree, and there's a passing criteria that's established based on acceptable standards, and they reflect the expected worker standards in a particular field. So, with our particular population and our particular product, if you want to call it a product, sometimes folks have a difficulty figuring out what credential aligns best to a specific program or specific needs. Like I mentioned, we have 120 different occupational credentials, and even on top of that, we deliver for about another 40 different industry associations as well. So, you know, when I mentioned carpentry just a second ago, I was referring to our own carpentry credential, but in addition to our own, we also deliver for the Home Builders Institute, which is a section of the National Association of Home Builders. They also have credentials. So, you know, even coming to our site, it's difficult for an individual to determine what they want to pursue. So that's kind of the issue. So the idea was that we could take the registry part of the Credential Engine. You know, people, including us, have put a lot of time into uploading credentials of all kinds. You know, there are degrees, there's diplomas, there's licenses, there's certificates, there's digital badges, there's micro-credentials, just a whole host of things. And, you know, it's difficult to, you know, compare and contrast those. So we thought that just in terms of our own little world, just in terms of NOCTI itself, we thought that there might be a better way to take a look at what credentials would be best for what particular population. So here's what our site looks like. These are just a couple of screenshots, and I know they're pretty small, but if you look at the left-hand screen there, the left-hand screenshot, it indicates the categories of credentials that we utilize. And what I'm talking about for the most part right now is what we call the job-ready credentials, which are in those 6 little paragraphs down at the bottom. It would be the upper left-hand one. And so if you clicked on that, you would see the second screen, the one to the right, the screenshot to the right, and that indicates the different clusters of occupational areas, the 16 clusters. So if you move to the next one, if you went to the next level, if you decided to click on a comparative view, what happens right now is that there's a PDF that would open under each occupational area that you happen to select. There's a couple of samples down the bottom, but you can see there's what we like to call a blueprint, or a layout of the standards and competencies, and how much emphasis employer groups has put on those different standards. Again, I don't expect you to be able to see that unless you have a really, really big screen back in your office. But you can see that there's different weightings and ratings put on different portions of those standards. So that serves lots of purposes. One, it allows you to align that with whatever program of study that you're dealing with, but it also gives the credential test taker an opportunity to see the emphasis. So, if there's 200 questions and 20% of the test is about blueprints, well, then, you get a pretty good idea of how many specific questions are on blueprint reading. So that's the idea. But my point with this particular slide is that in order to compare our own credentials, just looking at NOCTI specifically, you have to open up 3 different PDFs. And on a typical screen, even if you have multiple screens, there's a lot of information on those blueprints, and it's difficult to do the comparison. So what we could do is we could utilize a little widget of sorts on our web page that would connect directly to information that's on the registry. And so this is a mock-up of what it might potentially look like. And what you see right now is 3 distinct credentials that we already have listed in the registry. They're not related to carpentry. There's 2 in health and 1 in workplace readiness. But for whatever reason, let's just say that the individual was trying to determine which of those 3 credentials they would want to pursue. They can see all 3 of them, and they can see a short description of each on this particular screen. And if you dug a little bit further, what you could do is you could actually see the standards and even the individual competencies listed. So quite a difference from what you would be doing on our own website, because they're intended for different purposes. So just by the insertion of a widget on our particular website, or by the development of an app, we give the learner, or the person who's trying to determine what credential they're looking for, a better view to be able to compare and contrast. So here again is another look at the filtering mechanism that the Credential Engine already has. So in this particular slide, you can see a comparison of, I think that's 2 different health credentials. And down below, again, those of you familiar with the Credential Engine filtering mechanisms, which I assume most of the folks on this call are, you could go down below and you could click on individual competencies. You could click on, costs. You could click on all sorts of additional information. And these 2 parallel screens would pop up with parallel information. And again, remember, this is just on our site. Think about the possibility of being able to do that with several different folks who provide credentials. So, we think that's a real strong benefit. Again, what we've heard from the field that we serve is that even with people who are familiar with our own site, it's difficult for them to determine, what assessment credentials they want to employ, what level they want to use, who they should be talking to, how to cost out what a credential is going to cost, both in terms of time and also in terms of actual dollars. So the app or widget would certainly allow us to do a better job of allowing our candidates to compare. So that pretty much wraps it up for me, other than to say that we're excited about the potential of using the Credential Registry and designing apps that would not only serve our needs, but the needs of all the populations that we deal with. It's just it's a very unique way to be able to give folks the opportunity to weigh what direction they want to go and how much time it's going to take them to get there. And we think that's really important. So thanks very much, and I guess we go back to questions.
Thanks so much, Sean. That was a really great insight into how NOCTI is kind of making the most of what the Credential Registry really has to offer, and helping students and parents and people looking for what credentials they really should be taking in order to get to the places where they want to go. How can you make those comparisons? How can you make them easy to understand? And one of the other things that is pretty neat about the way the Credential Registry works and the way we sort of house our data is that because it's cloud-based and you can run it off of an API, you know, whenever NOCTI wants to update the information sort of on their end, the NOCTI site can talk to the Credential Registry site and instantaneously keep that information updated. So it's not the same as having to have a bunch of spreadsheets or access files in the background that you then have to keep updated all the time. You know, sort of through the miracle of technology, we're able to make sure that people who are looking for this kind of information are always getting the most up-to-date version of that data, which I think is really important because education and training is changing all the time, and we need to be able to have systems that can keep up with that speed of change. And with partnerships like with LRNG and NOCTI, we're providing that data that's sort of working at the speed of the 21st century. So thank you, and thank you to Connie. We have, as you'll notice, plenty of time on our schedule, and I promise not to keep everyone for another hour, but we do have some time for questions, and I am going to ask my colleague Scarlett to allow people to ask questions over the phone and unmute themselves to be able to ask that if you don't want to ask over the chat, or we will continue to monitor the chat. So Scarlett, can you unmute people, and if you've got questions, go right ahead.
Could I just insert one other piece? If you
Yeah, sure, go for it. Yep.
I thought it was interesting. We just returned from ATP, which is the Association of Test Publishers, and we did a couple of presentations about the Credential Engine to try to update that particular community. And one of the things that you mentioned reminded me of one of the other, you know, pretty strong benefits when you were talking about the API or the ability to update. One of the concerns, you know, amongst all test publishers and IO-psychologists and psychometricians and those kind of folks is maintaining quality in any sort of assessment that's related to a high-stakes credential. And part of that is the ability to, you know, keep your assessment vehicles up to speed with industry standards. And of course, you know, industry is continually changing, and that means for folks like us that you've got to revise your tests every, you know, certain amount of time. And most test providers that are tied to high-stakes credentials are looking at every 3 to 5 years, something in that range, to maintain the quality of their credentials. So, you know, if you're in that world, it's really critical that your folks who are on your staff don't have to spend lots and lots of manual hours, you know, updating the tests every, you know, 3 years, particularly if you've got, you know, 25 or 50 or, you know, 120 of them like we do. So I want to just, you know, emphasize how important that API table is, not only for convenience of the folks who are participating in the Credential Engine, but also for, you know, the whole emphasis on quality of, you know, assessments and credentials and, you know, those sorts of things. So thanks.
Absolutely, yeah. We do feel that the registry data is a way to keep an eye on sort of best practices in the industry or for that particular credential. So we are excited that we're able to have this kind of platform that is able to sort of keep up with that pace of change, and that, you know, as people are updating their credentials, they're able to go in and quickly compare, all right, well, what sort of things is this credential really, you know, are we expecting people with this credential to be able to know and do nowadays, and we'll have a way to be able to track too, you know, how has this credential changed over time, which I think is another really interesting feature for the Credential Registry. So I did see that we had some people maybe starting to type some questions into the chat. I don't know if maybe we accidentally answered them, but if you do have a question, go right ahead.
Hey, Carrie, can I just offer a comment while you're looking at the question based on a little bit of what Kelvin was raising in the chat, which there are a set of questions embedded what I see being asked there. So there's because I think the ecosystem of sort of badges, micro-credentialing, and credentialing, as John has alluded to, is complicated. And there's a burgeoning amount of activity. And sometimes it's hard to keep clear on, well, why would I do a badge versus a credential? Who's doing what in these particular spaces? So I just wanted to comment on that for a quick second.
Sure.
Particularly as someone who was the core funder and instigator behind the Open Badges infrastructure. And so part of, as we think about master, and Kelvin's identifying that there's a group of private schools who have come together to think about a mastery transcript consortium, and part of the pain point and problem they're trying to solve with that is that grades are not enough and are not nuanced enough to really sort of represent what kids know and are able to do, and how do we expand what the transcript looks like in addition to other things. So I think in this emerging world that we have now, there need to be a set of ways of providing, particularly the learner, with feedback on how they're doing, and that have a granular enough approach that allow us to sort of breadcrumb or create paths to future opportunities. And when we created the badge, we weren't certain how things would play out, but the idea behind the badge was that it could be really granular and quite flexible in how it was used. It is not intended to replace credentials, for example. So that's part of why Credential Engine and the work that John's team does is so important, is that we want to be able to take the higher stakes credentials and be able to backward map them into a whole set of pathways for young people. And that really is the role of badges, so that badges don't have to be high stakes. They can instead be lots of opportunities for kids to get feedback, to see where they are on their progression to earning a higher stakes credential, and to work with folks who are creating those credentials so that we can backward map them. Again, we don't want a ton of gatekeepers in this future ecosystem, but we do want a core set of credentials that everybody agrees on, has credibility, and relates to particular high-stakes opportunities. So all of that just to say is that I think there's just an important role in this ecosystem to map out the role and purpose of things like badges and how they then relate to micro-credentials and to credentials. And so as we work with you all on this call, that's a really important sort of, so who's doing badges versus who's doing credentials versus how does this fit in the context of some of the IMS Global and Mastery transcript work. That may have been more confusing than helpful, but that was just a little bit of an attempt to start helping to lay out what the ecosystem looks like.
Absolutely, and thank you so much, Connie, for your insight there. Yeah, we think that when you are able to have a truly transparent credentialing marketplace, and we consider badges, as a part of that credentialing marketplace, that's exactly right. Your students are able to see all those opportunities and check in sort of how they're going, how they're doing, figure out how are these things maybe connecting into other credentials or stacking up on one another, and really being able to see all of the opportunities in front of them and being able to compare sort of apples to apples. And so I know that we're working with IMS Global because I've heard their name in meetings before. I will check in with my tech team to see if we're working with Mastery. I feel like we probably are, but I'm not in on some of the more kind of ecosystem mapping meetings, so I will have to check in on that. In the meantime, we have gotten a question from Beth. She was wondering how much LRNG and NOCTI's efforts assist with helping formerly incarcerated get trained and certified for jobs. So there's, she references there's current legislation being talked about, and the idea of competency-based versus degree-based hiring is being revisited by employers. So how does the registry and the LRNG and NOCTI sort of impact that sector? So at least from the Credential Engine perspective, so the Credential Registry does not collect any sort of individual information. So if you're looking for, what does somebody who might be formerly incarcerated, what kind of credentials do they have? We don't collect individual information. What we do collect information on is the credential itself and the information sort of housed within it. What sort of competencies are in there? Are there assessments, learning opportunities, costs, quality assurance metrics, employer preferences, labor market information are all things that we're kind of working on or are already sort of baked into our language as data points we can collect information on. So what we can do is for that population, if and when they do acquire a credential, an employer would be able to then look up that credential from the Credential Registry and figure out, okay, what does this person, what can they know and what do they know and can do? So that's sort of from our perspective, but Connie or John, do you have any additional sort of insights from your perspective on Beth's question?
Yeah, I can go first if
sure.
you'd like me to. We have two things, and I wasn't sure if I picked up all the right wording. So if we're talking about currently incarcerated or formerly, but if we're talking about currently, that's been a difficult population for us to serve, not because of anything that is either of our faults, but mostly because of policies in place in a lot of states that deal with internet access in with incarcerated populations. We've had as you might suspect or probably know, there's lots of let's call it vocational training that occurs within the prison walls for certain populations, and they could use our services to kind of do a prior learning assessment and actually achieve college credit for that. The problem for us has been that most of the work that we do is, well, right now I think our current numbers are like 96%. So we're 96% online in terms of the the credentialing assessments, and so it's difficult for us to get the word out, so to speak, to that particular population. We do have a couple states in the South that we are working with incarcerated populations where they are able to access the assessments after they've taken the time to figure out if it's aligned with what they've learned and all that kind of thing. So just thinking about what I showed folks just a minute ago with our own blueprints, think about someone trying to figure out who doesn't have a connection to our world, how to figure out what competencies they've learned and what credential they should pursue and all that kind of thing. So there's a bit of a, I don't know, awareness/marketing issue as well as a technology issue. But one other thing before I throw it back open, we do have a prior learning assessment. So for folks who are ex-incarcerated, I guess you could say, who are recently out, we do have an opportunity for them to take experiences that they've gained and try to convert them into a college credit. So we have a prior learning assessment that's accessible by individuals. And again, if they score at a proper rate, at a predetermined rate, then they could achieve college credit. And the statistics and the research say that individuals who start on a college track have a better completion rate if they already have credits kind of in the bag, so to speak. So hopefully that helps that particular population.
Thanks, John. Connie, do you have anything to add from LRNG and sort of formerly incarcerated people looking to get back into sort of the education and training space?
Yeah, at this point, it is one of those things that you say is it's in your mind but not designed out. So we are thinking about it. We very much want to make a difference in that space. We will be announcing a bit of a set of new work at ASU GSV with John Legend that's somewhat related to this. But I would love suggestions from the folks on the webinar for how that integration might happen or what would make sense given what you're learning about our work and John's work. We're totally open and really want to make a difference in that area as well, but we've not designed it out yet.
Great, thank you. It looks like Beth may have gotten her question answered, and Beth, I also see that Michael was interested in maybe what specific piece of legislation you were referencing, so if you could just pop that in the chat, I think that would be a helpful resource to us all. So I see there's a little bit continuing. Oh, we've got another question here. I guess this is for both parties. Do you have any experience giving credit or crosswalking foreign credentials to credentials in the registry? Well, that might actually be for me. So we do plan to go international. Right now, we estimate that in the U.S. alone, there are about 350,000 different kinds of credentials, or 350,000 credentials, if you think of everything from like a high school diploma up through a PhD in sort of traditional academia, plus badges, plus certificates and licenses and apprenticeships and sort of everything in between. So 350,000 is a big number for us to try and tackle right off the bat. But we do understand that we live in a global economy, which means that our credentials are also global. So we are thinking about the best way to go international and look into international credentialing opportunities and how to crosswalk that with information into the registry to put everything into our credential transparency description language, so that we can do that kind of apples to apples comparison. But that's still in the works. So that's a great question. I love how you're forward thinking there, Denise. We're just you've gotten a little bit ahead of me, so we don't have anything for you today. But check back with us. It's a thing and it's happening soon. All right. Any other questions while we have the time? Okay, I see our chat has gone quiet, so I am going to thank Connie from LRNG and John from NOCTI. Thank you so much for presenting and sharing your work with us today. We will be following up with everybody on this webinar with the slides, so you'll have access to that. We also have recorded this webinar and we'll make that available to you on our YouTube page, as well as these slides will go up on our website with our other application showcase partners, and I will add the link to that in the chat. Oh no, we've got to, I was going to let you go so quickly, but multiple attendees are typing. Hopefully they're just saying, I think they're probably just saying thank you so much for a great chat. But without anything else, I'm going to let everybody have the rest of your Monday back. Yes, thank you messages are coming through. Thank you so much, everyone. This concludes our webinar.